just confused. Good evening. This is the transitioning to organic livestock production with Mike Herbst, and he is a farmer and an organic inspector at Red Hot Rise Organics in Jefferson County, West Virginia. And this is part of the transitioning to organic production practices. I think I got that right. Sponsored by the United States Department of Agriculture, the Agricultural Marketing Service, the National Organic Program, and the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and welcome to Jason here as well. And go ahead and take it away, Mike.
Sure, thank you for that. So today we're going to be looking at the organic livestock regulations in the National Organic Program standards. This is going to be geared for anybody who is interested in engaging in organic livestock, either transitioning their current farm to an organic farm, or for those who may be interested in starting organic livestock production newly. I am a crop farmer. I'm not a livestock farmer, so I will speak as much as I can on the regulations and from my understanding with experience, but I'm not a livestock farmer, so that in terms of hands-on applicability of some of this will be somewhat limited, but I just wanted to give that little disclaimer there at the beginning. Oops. All right. So the National Organic, just a little quick primer here on the National Organic Program. So organic is a legal term defined by the NOP from the Organic Food Productions Act in 1990. And organic farming is the production system that follows the rules of the act. And so following the rules is what allows your operation to be organic or not. The organic farming uses cultural and biological and mechanical practices that promote and conserve biological cycles, biodiversity. It's not what you can and can't use. The emphasis is on maintaining and building natural systems. And so as we're looking through the livestock regulation, keep in mind that this here on this screen is the motivation for all the practices. So when it comes to animal health and welfare and living conditions and so on, that we're going to be talking about, the motivator here is doing it, is operating our production system here in a way that promotes these biological systems, these natural systems, and conserves natural resources and so on. So here's just like a quick little screenshot from the website for the Code of Federal Regulations. Part 205, National Organic Program, that's where we're going to be getting our information from here today. And if you look down at the bottom, subpart C, organic production and handling requirements, that's broken up into crops is the first part of that, and then the second part of that is livestock. And so we're going to be looking mostly at the livestock sections from that subpart C there today. Things we won't be covering here today that are covered in some of the other top webinars that have been put out here this year are just some of the things that any organic operation has to follow. So if you look back on that screen, some of these ones from 205, 103, 105, those are topics about record keeping. All organic farms have to maintain certain records. I believe there's a seminar about that. Allowed and prohibited substances, methods, and ingredients. And 105, that's mostly where you see rules about not allowing GMOs, rules about not using sewage sludge, ionizing radiation, and then prohibited substances, both non-synthetics that are prohibited, and then it also discusses allowed synthetics. For livestock, that's 603. Excuse me, there's a typo there. Prohibited non-synthetics should be 604. There's only one of those is strychnine. So when we talk about prohibited non-synthetics or prohibited natural substances for livestock, the only one is strychnine. And then we'll talk a little bit about the allowed synthetics, but we're not going to like dive into that too deep. We'll just mention kind of where that comes up, particularly in the area of healthcare for livestock. Another component of an organic operation is the organic systems plan, which is discussed in 205, 201. And we're not going to go over organic system OSPs, organic system plans here today, but just know that if you're going to be an organic livestock operation, you have to keep records. The OSP, or the organic production system plan, is basically your application to a certifier, but it outlines all the practices and management plans that you have in place for your organic farm, and everything's contained there, from maps of your farms to field history to with livestock, you have to actually go through and individually identify like all your cattle and so on. So individual identifiers and just how you're going to operate your farm to ensure that you are following the organic regulations that we're going to be talking about here. And it's just, and then when you're inspected basically against that, because the certifier says, okay, here's what you say you're doing. The inspector comes and looks what you are doing and kind of compares your operation to what's contained in your OSP. So we're not going to really go over OSP information other than just knowing that's where you would write down all the ways that you're doing the things, the practices that we're going to be discussing coming up here. And so, like I said, we're going to be looking at the 205 section there, or excuse me, the subpart C of part 205. 205 is just all organic. Subpart C is the is where we have the production and handle the production rules. So here, so for livestock, we're going to be looking at origin of livestock. Oh, and I should preface this by saying that a lot of this is, some of this is new as of this year, particularly when we look at origin, living conditions, and transport. A lot of that, and the pasture practice, there's like a lot of changes happen recently, and hopefully I've contained all those new changes in here. I'm not going to highlight everything that's new. We're just going to talk about this as this is just what it is as it stands. But origin of livestock, livestock feed, livestock care, mammalian and non-avian livestock living conditions, and pasture practice. I've got a little bit in there about avian living conditions. We're not going to get into that too much because that can get really detailed about like how many feet, how big does the opening in that allows them access to the outside have to be based on the number of birds you have, and based on the size of the bird, what is the density of the stocking that they can be within the enclosure and so on. So I'm not going to get into like all the details of that. I'm just going to generally say that there's regulations about certain things because that can get a little nitty gritty. But if you go look into 205, 241, all that's outlined there. And then just briefly touch on transport and slaughter. There's not a whole lot to talk about there for an extended period of time. So it's mostly those first 4 or 5 there that we'll be spending most of our time here on this evening. So origin of livestock, livestock products that are to be organic must be from livestock that are that are under continuous organic management from the last third of gestation or hatching. That's sort of the blanket statement. Now, the big thing is, what are the exceptions to that? So under continuous organic management from last third of gestation or hatching. So exceptions, poultry. So they have to be under continuous organic management from the second day of life. My understanding is there might be a little bit of, like if you get them shipped in the mail, usually you can get some paperwork. They might be able to fudge some things a little bit there, but generally second day of life is when poultry has to be under continuous organic management. Dairy animals, and this is new here, that you may transition dairy animals, non-organic dairy animals. So this would be anybody who's trying to transition to organic. You may do that once. This is the new thing this time around with the new regulation, is that you can transition organic dairy animals once. After that one-time transition, only animals must be sourced under continuous organic management from the last third of gestation can be organic, and this is for dairy production. So slaughter stock is treated differently. Here's a little more detail about that dairy transition. So at the top there, so a new organic operation, so one that's not certified organic, sorry, both of these are not certified organic. So these situations here. So a new or transitioning dairy operation, so never certified organic before. You can purchase or raise animals that are organic. That's the blue A there. And then you can one-time transition non-organic animals into organic production. And once your certification is complete, now you are an operation. You can only add animals that have been organically managed from the last third of gestation. And you can no longer transition animals to becoming organic. And a transition animal will always be a transitioned animal, as you'll see coming up here. The transitioned animal does not become an organic animal, but it maintains a transition animal because there are some differences between one that has been raised organically from the beginning there versus one that has been transitioned. Some more details about transitioning. They must be under organic management for a minimum of 12 months before milk or milk products are organic. During that transition, dairy animals and their offspring may consume third-year transitional crops. One thing that when you have organic livestock or especially when you have organic ruminants, you have to have pasture, and the pasture has to be maintained as an organic crop. So when you're transitioning your herd to organic, you're also transitioning, or unless you already have organic fields, but you have to have land that that has organic crop production on it. So they are allowed to eat transitional crops. And that's a 3-year period to transition land from into organic management. That would be in some of the crop seminars. But you have to, you have to follow as a livestock producer, you have to follow all the organic crop regulations as well. Offspring born during or after the 12-month transition period can also be transitioned animals or organically managed. So the transition, offspring born or during, they would be transitioned if the mother or the offspring ate transition crop. But if the mother ate organic from the last third of gestation, and then the offspring there ate all organic, then they would be organic. So offspring born will be transition organic depending on the feed that's given. All your dairy animals must end transition at the same time. So again, this is one time, they're all in together. And transition animals, and here's where a transition animal doesn't become an organic animal, it remains a transitioned animal, is that organic livestock products other than milk and milk products are not organic. So a transition animal can't be used for organic slaughter stock. So you're not going to see that. So your transitioned animals, this is only for dairy. Their dairy products can be used organic 12 months at a minimum after they have been under continuous organic management. Some exceptions. So breeder stock is another exception to that all animals must be organic all the time from the last third of gestation. That breeder stock may be brought from a non-organic operation onto an organic operation at any time. But keeping in mind that you're never gonna get dairy from them, that you're never gonna get meat from them. They are just used strictly for breeding. And so for their offspring to be organic, they must be brought onto the operation no later than the last third of gestation for their offspring, and they have to be managed organically throughout the last third of gestation and lactation period, during which time they may nurse their own offspring. So we're talking about the offspring being organic. You have to have the mother there for the last third gestation, and then the feed that must be managed organic, but that's usually referring to the feed that the mother must have organic feed for the last third of gestation and during lactation. And then the offspring would be organic. That would not be a transition calf. That would be an organic calf or whatever animal we're talking about here. It could be goats, sheep. pigs, etc. Breeder stock and dairy animals and transition animals that have not been under continuous organic management may not be used as organic slaughter stock. So this is just a restating of that. This comes up again here, just to be like very clear. So breeder stock, transitioned animals, and dairy animals that have not been organic from the last third of their gestation may not be used as slaughter stock. And this last one is in there as a regulation. It should seem obvious to anyone, but if it's removed from an organic operation and handled in a non-organic operation, it's no longer organic. That would come into play with handling. So you have to make sure that butcher, where they're getting slaughtered and so on, is approved or certified to be organic. So that the manager handled, the handling would be the one that would be the more important one, that as a livestock operator, you would want to make sure it happens so that all of the animal products remain organic. All right, so that's the end of talking about origin of livestock. We're going to move on to feed. And so there's this blanket statement at the beginning, similar to origin, and then we're going to talk about some of the nuances and exceptions. But an organic livestock operation must provide a total feed ration composed of agricultural products, including pasture and forage, that are organically produced and handled by certified operations. So that's what comes in, where either you need to be producing your own organic feed or you need to be buying it, but agricultural products must be certified organic. So allowed synthetics, that would be in 205-603, and non-synthetics that are not prohibited, so any non-synthetic that's not strychnine, may be used as a feed additive or feed supplement. However, and this is again just a reiteration here, that all agricultural ingredients in the feed must be produced and handled organically. So anything that is agricultural, anything that can be certified organic. Before the session here, we were talking about things that are not certified organic. So there's no organic fish. So I know that fish products are sometimes added into animal feeds and supplements and things like that. You don't have to be using organic fish because there is no organic fish. It's not an agricultural product that can be certified organic. There's no organic honey. So if it's an agricultural product that can be certified organic in the feed, it has to be. That's what that rule says there. Some things that are prohibited in livestock feed. You cannot use animal drugs, including hormones, to promote growth. You cannot be providing supplements and additives more than is necessary or more than is required for the animal at its specific stage of life. No plastic pellets, no formulas containing urea or manure, no slaughter byproducts from mammals or poultry. You can't have feed with added antibiotics, and you cannot prevent ruminant animals from actively obtaining feed grazed from pasture during the grazing season, with exceptions. And pasture, having ruminants on pasture is a big part of organic production, and that's going to come. We're going to talk about that a lot. There are certain exceptions where pasture is not required for ruminants, and we'll get into that. So ruminants, this is kind of the pasture rule, although usually it's I think it's 240 is usually kind of cited as the pasture rule, because that's all about pasture, but I kind of think of it all together. But ruminant animals must be grazed throughout the entire grazing season, which is a minimum of 120 days per calendar year. And the grazing season is site dependent. So it's the period of time when pasture is available, depending on your climate, where you are, due to your weather, seasons. Grazing season may or may not be continuous. All of a sudden, the pasture is not available, and you have to you're taking them inside and feeding them not from pasture, but a minimum of 120 days per calendar year. Ruminants must be on pasture.
Is there
Sure.
a number for the season in West Virginia, or are there different zones that have different number of days for that's considered the season?
Yeah, yeah, so 120 days. I don't know that's a good question.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is that
Sure. Go ahead.
the water.
I think I lost you there a sec.
Oh, am I now? I'm still here.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, I think we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Oh, just got a note that says my internet connection is unstable. So okay, sorry about that. Yeah, no, I was getting at you talk about the grazing season. Uh, how do you define that based on is it by growing zone, or something like that, or the number of
That's
days
going to
that
be part of it. It's different than a growing season. So the zones define your growing season, which is determined by precipitation and temperature largely. And so the grazing season is generally going to be shorter than your growing season because, it takes a little bit for your pasture to come back from the winter. But I think as long as you're doing 120 days and you're, explaining that in your OSP, like here's what I'm doing and why. Generally, I think that's going to be okay. I mean, certainly, definitely around here, I think around 120, 140 is kind of what you commonly see. I mean, I will say producers generally try to have that be as short as possible because during the growing season, as you're about to show you, there's some strict rules about how much of the feed is coming from pasture, how much of the dry matter intake. And so largely farmers will not want to have to like mind that. At the same time, getting them feed from pastures is cheaper than buying in.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. So there's not a lookup table that says, oh, you live in this county in West Virginia, and this is what the number of days you should be meeting.
I think you might be able to find that information in general, but I don't know how site specific that gets.
Okay.
That is a very good question. I'm sorry that I don't have a more specific answer to
No,
that.
that's fine.
So here's getting into some of the specifics during the grazing season. So producers must provide. So there's some places here I've underlined the word must. Must is the word from the regulation, and when you see a must, you must. But pasture must be provided sufficient quality and quantity to graze throughout the grazing season and to provide an average of at least 30% of their dry matter intake, or DMI, throughout the grazing season. Another way to say that is a producer can provide no more than 70% of the ruminant's dry matter demand from dry matter fed.
Okay.
And the way you're going to calculate that is you look at how much basically you're feeding them in the winter when they're not grazing, and then that's basically what the dry matter demand for the animal is going to be. And then during the grazing season, you take how much is fed and then you subtract that out, and then what's left is presumably what they're getting from pasture. And this is calculated as an average over the entire grazing season for each type and class of animal. Exceptions to the pasture rule: breeding bulls, temporary denial of pasture for dry off and birthing, and there's some specific timing related to that. And then newborn dairy cattle may be confined and denied pasture for up to 6 months, after which they must be given access to pasture and be getting their dry matter intake from pasture at the required rate there. And we're going to get into some more details about some of the newborn dairy cattle when it comes to living conditions as well. Feed records must be kept. This is just so it can be audited to make sure that you as a producer are meeting that dry matter intake from pasture requirement. So you have to be maintaining total feed rations for each type and class of animal, a list of all feed supplements and additives. Basically, anything that you're using as an input on your organic farm has to be contained and documented somewhere. Document the quantity of each feed actually fed, document changes made to all rations. So usually your rations will change 2, 3, 4 times a year as things become available. And so you just have to maintain that so it can be audited, and then provide a method for calculating dry matter demand and dry matter intake. And that's basically kind of what I generally outlined, is that the dry matter demand is determined by winter rations, and then dry matter intake during the growing season is determined using that, and also knowing what the dry matter fed during the grazing season as well.
Okay. And does West Virginia Farmers Market Association provide templates for those kind of documentations? Maybe not a question for you, but for
yeah, I was waiting for our moderator here to step in.
Yeah.
I will say your certifier would generally provide you templates for this. Certifiers, because they want you to have access to that. Their ATRA is a resource online as well that has a lot of sample templates.
ATRA.
ATTRA, ATRA. I
Okay.
forget exactly what that stands for. They have a lot of templates, and they even have a whole PDF about all this stuff that I'm talking about today. They have all kinds of documents to explain that. And then if you go to the NOP's website, or the Department of Agriculture's website, they actually have some information there about calculating dry matter demand, like in terms of the specific calculating here. So if you just search like NOP dry matter demand tables or something like that, they have a lot of resources there as well. Again, because this is new, they're trying to make sure that everybody knows it and how to do it and so on. But
And this is
definitely,
for all the milk producing, so the goats, the sheep, and the cattle.
yeah. So anything, yeah. So all your ruminants, applies to all of them. I will probably largely speak as it relates to dairy, to like cows and cattle. That's largely what you see. But yes, please keep in mind that this applies to any dairy animal, milk producing animal, or in this case, any ruminant. So sheep, goats, etc.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. And then this is kind of skipping ahead to 240 here, just the pasture practice standard. The producer of organic livestock operation must for all ruminant livestock in the operation demonstrate functioning management plan for pasture. So that's in your OSP. You have to demonstrate that you have the capability to follow these pasture rules. And like I said earlier, pasture must be managed as an organic crop according to all the organic crop standards. That's related to input, land requirements, seed sourcing requirements, and pest, weed, disease management practices. Crop rotation doesn't really come into play so much when you're talking about pasture. It can, but you want to make sure that you're following all those rules, 202 through 206.
Okay. And so there's probably the organic crop standard. So if I were to go to West Virginia and purchase, 40 acres, let's say, and not knowing how it had been managed in the past, I would have a period of time, I'm assuming, to transition that to organic.
Yes, for 3 years. Once that land becomes, or once you start managing that land organically and you have documentation of it from that's when it would become, you can transition to organic. Alternatively, sometimes you can get prior land use statements from the previous owner, where they would be able to state when they had like a last prohibited substance on those fields.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a long lead kind of thing if you wanted to set up like a organic dairy farm, for instance, right? So
yeah, I mean, but if you've been doing it, yeah. I mean, conceivably, if you're starting from like day one, then yeah, it could be it'd be a 3-year process for you to get things where they need to be, where you could be totally self-contained, using all of your own pasture and hay fields, etc., for feed, corn fields, grain fields. This is again, this is new. NLP put out some little explainer documents here, and I pulled these charts from it. So just just another way to see some of the stuff that I was just saying. But you have to meet all land requirements for certified organic land. You have to maintain access throughout the growing season. See if it says anything here about that might depend on the region.
Yeah, I see
Um,
something about plant species management. So I'm assuming there's probably, if you have noxious or something, you wouldn't want it. You'd have to eliminate that maybe. Is that what that indicates, you think?
I'm sorry, where are you seeing this?
That's the number one where it talks about includes details such as plant species.
Yeah, so that's like, are you planting oats, alfalfa, orchard grass, hay, like what? That's all. It's like exactly what, so as an organic grower of organic crops, you have to document like every single seed, every single crop that is on your land, and so that's what that's talking about there.
And so, Mike, you do this at your farm, all this already with your
Yeah, for vegetables and a couple berries. So we have
wow.
strawberries and blueberries, and then we have organic vegetables for farmers markets
And how long have you been doing this?
since 2017.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness. Okay.
yeah. Um, uh, so sorry, jumping back into this,
Yeah.
you have to
So I
allow
didn't mean to derail you.
year-round access to the outdoors. That's kind of a living conditions requirement. We're going to talk about that. But these are what we're looking for here with pasture. And then finally, this is a little more explaining about how you would follow that dry matter intake requirement. So ruminants must get at least 30% DMI from pasture during the year. That was during the grazing. There's an asterisk there. I should have pulled up what that is.
Yeah, it's
But
probably somewhere in there. It was probably what you discussed on the previous slides, the details.
oops, hang on. Oh man, I didn't mean to do that. I confused myself for a second here. Hang on, I'm going to run through. Is it 30% through the grazing season or through the year? Now I'm getting confused. That was just during the grazing season.
Yeah, I was thinking it was the 30-70 rule was for the entire year, but you balance it. I would imagine that the dry matter, the bulk of it is during the grazing season, and then the non-grazing season is when they're getting
Yeah,
dry
during the
matter.
grazing season, provide no more than 70%. So I don't know, like that chart there's got some asterisks. Is carrying a little bit of weight there. All right, we're moving along. So that's the end of what we're going to be talking about with feed there. Just the main takeaway is that all agricultural ingredients in the feed have to be organic, and that there's special rules for ruminants on pasture. Livestock care and production practices. So this is healthcare here. Similar to organic crops, you have to maintain and establish preventative practices. So in all organic production, we're looking for preventative before we start using things like pesticides, things like medications, synthetic medications, and so on. So our preventative practices include selection of suitable species and type of livestock, and that's for your climate, region, land, etc. Feed rations sufficient to meet the nutritional requirements, so we're feeding them enough food. We're establishing appropriate housing and pasture conditions, sanitation practices, and providing conditions which allow for exercise, freedom of movement, reduction of stress. So we're basically putting them, again, this goes back to the very beginning when we talked about natural systems here, is that we're putting these animals in a good situation for them to do what they do naturally and succeed naturally, rather than having to use inputs to maintain their health. Some more preventative healthcare practices, administration of vaccines and other veterinary biologics. Surgical procedures necessary to treat illness or injury must be done that promotes the animal's well-being, minimizes pain, stress, and suffering. And use of allowed materials is appropriate. And we have to be monitoring for lameness and timely and appropriate treatment of lameness and mitigation of cause of lameness. So we just want to, again, we're trying to keep them in a healthy situation so they can be healthy, produce good crops for us or good products for us without having to use inputs. But we will talk about synthetic materials in a second here. Physical alterations. This is one of the new items here when it comes to the organic livestock management here. So we can only be doing physical alterations for health and safety, for safety and identification purposes at a young age in a manner that minimizes stress and by a qualified person. Allowed but not routinely. You have to show, give reason for why you're going to be teeth clipping in pigs, tail docking in pigs, and then this list of prohibited items here. I'm not going to run through all of them and explain what all of them are, but this is all new, that they went and specifically said all of these things that you can't be doing. So allowed synthetic substances is where I'm going to talk about 603 just a little bit here. So largely, it talks about a lot of different stuff, but when it comes to healthcare, it allows for the use of preventative medicines when preventative practices are inadequate, and it allows for parasiticides on breeder stock and dairy animals and fiber-bearing animals. There's certain timing rules about that, and when you have to withdraw, we have to take the animals out of production temporarily, and so on. But allowed synthetics do come up, and they allow for us to maintain the well-being of the animal.
It's interesting, fiber bearing animals. And so you can certify organic like wool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So a product would not be organic if it's derived from an animal treated with antibiotics, a synthetic substance that's not allowed specifically. When it comes to 603, all synthetics are prohibited except when allowed. All non-synthetics are allowed except when prohibited. So you're not allowed to use strychnine. It would not be organic if you did. Then milk from animals during a withdrawal period would not be organic, but that may be fed to calves. And then if the animal's going under treatment under a prohibited substance, so something that's not on 603, that would not be an organic product. Some prohibited medical practices, synthetic medications, unless specifically allowed, hormones, unless specifically allowed. You cannot use synthetic parasiticides on a routine basis. Synthetic parasiticides for use on slaughter stock is not allowed, and then you can't be using your medications in violation of the FDA and Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act.
And does the CFR go into examples of allowed versus non-allowed?
The 603 what?
Does it go into examples of allowed versus not allowed?
No. Well, so it lists, it does not list products. It's a list of materials, of actual. So it's not going to say like this product, that product, and so on. And it doesn't say things that are not allowed. So when it comes to synthetics, the assumption is all synthetics are prohibited unless specified in 603. And commonly they'll have restrictions in there that you're allowed to use it in this manner on these animals, and so on. So you have to be following the restrictions there.
Okay.
But it's not examples. It is a full list of allowed synthetics, and usually lists the circumstances in which they're permitted. And it'll also say, for specific uses. It's not just like you can use this blanketly. It's used for this specific situation.
And then, of course, you document all that. And
all this has to be documented. Yeah. So I think that might come up in a second. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's prohibited to neglect to identify and record treatment. All that has to be recorded in your records. Prohibited medical practices. You can't withhold treatment. You can't withhold treatment in an effort to preserve an organic status of an animal. A lot of these rules are in place. Well, they're all in place to preserve the well-being of the animal. So you can't be withholding treatment to try to keep it organic, and you can't withhold treatment just in general for injured disease or sick animals, and that treatment may include euthanasia. So you can't withhold that when necessary. And then you cannot neglect to identify and record treatments. So you have to be documenting that. You have to be documenting all the treatments that you're using, all the inputs, all the materials, anything you're using, when you're using it, quantities you're using, and so on. And again, records for that. You can get examples usually from your certifier. I mentioned there's some at ATRA, but the main thing with records is that you can tailor them to your operation. So you have the say as to how you maintain your records, provided that they're sufficient to be audited and fully document and disclose what you're doing. And then you can't practice induced molting in poultry. You have to have a parasite control plan, just a plan to minimize internal parasite problems, including preventative measures. So your pasture management, fecal monitoring, emergency measures in the event of a parasite breakout. You have to have that plan in place. Euthanasia, this is one of the new things. I know I said I wasn't going to highlight all of them, but all the ones that I remember, I kind of am. So you have to have a written plan for prompt and humane euthanasia. There's some prohibited methods there, and you have to carefully examine to ensure that they're deceased. I think that's the livestock care there. So we're going to move on to living conditions. Although, did you have a question there?
No. Please go ahead.
Living conditions here for non-avians and mammals. So this is just a little general. Here, the rules are designed for allow natural behavior and safety of the animal. So that's what all the motivation is here for. Again, going back to that one of those first slides, it's all about the natural processes and preserving those and maintaining those to allow those to work for us as an organic producer. So we must establish and maintain year-round living conditions which accommodate the well-being and natural behavior of the animals, which may include, or does include, excuse me, year-round access as appropriate. And there's specific rules as to what that as appropriate means, but generally year-round access to outdoor shade, shelter, exercise areas, fresh air, clean water for drinking, direct sunlight. And then for all ruminants, management on pasture and daily grazing throughout the grazing season. So we're looking for these conditions to exist all the time. So year-round access to all of this as appropriate. And so like the as appropriate is like when you have like freezing temperatures or conditions that are going to potentially injure the animals here. Outdoor space must be provided year-round. When the outdoor space includes soil, it must have vegetative cover to be maintained as appropriate. Again, that's for like the season and so on. Season, climate, geography, and stage of production, but we're not looking for bare dirt lots out here as year-round bare dirt lots. So our yards, feeding pads, and feedlots may use these to provide ruminants with access to the outdoors during the non-grazing season and during the grazing season to provide supplemental feeding. They must be large enough to prevent competition for food. Appropriate clean dry bedding. Refuges used as bedding must be produced organically. This goes back to the organic requirement for all agricultural products and feed. So the idea being that if there's refuges in the bedding, there's a chance the animal might eat it. So it's got to be organic. Shelter that allows for just freedom of movement. Here, lie down, turn around, stand up, fully stretch, express normal patterns of behavior, suitable temperature level, ventilation, circulation, reduction for potential injury. And indoor housing must have areas for bedding and resting that are suitable for the animal. And then this is just sort of like general cleaning management to prevent contamination and degradation of natural resources here. These kind of come in different parts of the rule there. I kind of aggregated them all here together. So when you're using the yards and the feeding pads and feedlots, laneways have to be well drained, kept in good conditions, including frequent removal of wastes and managed to prevent runoff and wastes and contaminated waters. Our housing pens areas must be properly cleaned and disinfected to prevent cross infection and buildup of disease-carrying organisms, and manure has to be managed to prevent contamination of crops, soil, or water. That's a crop standard as well, that you have to manage your manure in a way that's not going to lead to any environmental problems. But also here, the addition with livestock is that you're using it to optimize the recycling of nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
and managing in a way that doesn't put soil and water at risk. So, and crops that usually comes up is not applying manure onto like frozen ground where it's just going to slide off, or you want to be incorporating it into your soils as soon as you can, things like that. With livestock, that can come in like your storage issues. When you're storing your manure, you want to make sure that it's stored in a way that's not going to lead to problems. I know some counties and some places have ordinances about that, but ones that don't, you still have to be making sure that you're doing that in a way that's not going to lead to any issues.
Okay.
Living conditions with dairy stock young. So we talked about that earlier with feed, that they're not subject to the pasture rule for the first 6 months. And here they have some living conditions exceptions here, that they can be housed in individual pens until completion of the weaning process, as long as they have enough room to move around, lie down, stretch, get up, groom themselves. And also, and again, this is for the well-being of the animals, is that they have to be designed and located so that each animal can see, smell, and hear other animals. So they can't be entirely isolated. There's some specifics here for swine. They must be housed in groups, except for some situations here. So some stage of life stuff for sows, boars, multiple swine with multiple documented instances of aggression, and if they're recovering from illness, so you can have them isolated for those. Piglets not kept on flat decks or in piglet cages, and rooting material must be provided except during farrowing and suckling periods. So there's some swine conditions here that are specific. So in confinement, there has to be enough stalls to provide natural behaviors for the animals required. So that's what we were talking about before. So this is when we're talking about putting your cows in stalls to milk them, feeding stalls, things like that. So for swine, the number of feeding stalls may be less than the number of animals, provided they're fed routinely over a 24-hour period. We don't want there to be competition for food. With cattle, there are certain acceptable housing, although up there top, a cage is not called you can't call a cage a stall. So there's some specific things here that do allow you to eat. So these are where they can be tied in place as long as they can like stand up and go to the bathroom, not on one another, and so on. Confinement, continuous total confinement of any animal indoors is prohibited. And continuous total confinement of ruminants in yards, feeding pads and feedlots is prohibited because they have to be out on pasture. So even more so, whereas I think like swine, you can have them on their outdoor area can be that, you don't have to be putting pigs out on pasture. There's some exceptions here for temporary confinement. So this is, when you talk about during like the grazing season, or even in the winter time when there's inclement weather, they can be temporarily confined for a stage of life. So that would be the example of 6 months for dairy cattle. For 6 months, lactation is not a stage of life that you're allowed to confine them for. Temporarily confine them for health, safety, their well-being, risks to soil or water, for preventative healthcare procedures or for the treatment of illness, sorting or shipping animals and livestock sales. For breeding, although there's some rules there, where you're not doing it for an excessive period of time, and you can't be confining them to confirm pregnancy. And then you can temporarily confine for youth projects, although there's some specifics there for when you can, for how long you can do it for those youth projects. When we get to the avian livestock, temporary confinement, a lot of this is like all but one of these is exactly the same. And
Okay.
I have them all up there. The main difference is for breeding, like you're not doing that. But all the other ones apply to birds as well. Some other temporary confinements. So deny ruminant animals. So that was all animals. Now we're talking about ruminants specifically. So it's all non-mammalian and non-avian. And now we're talking about ruminants specifically. They can be denied pasture. This is some stage of life stuff that we had talked about. with as it relates to birth and lactation and so on. Newborn dairy cattle, again, they can be confined for up to 6 months, after which they must be on pasture during the grazing season, and they can't be individually housed at that point, where we were allowed for individual confinement for the first 6 months. And then dairy and fiber-bearing animals can be confined temporarily for shearing and milking. When it comes to milking of your ruminants, though, you have to do it in a way that's not going to prevent them from meeting the pasture rule. So your schedule has to allow for them to be getting their dry matter intake from pasture as required. Ruminant slaughter stock during the finishing period. So we're talking about grain finished is commonly done. So they have to be maintained on pasture. So they have to be having access to pasture for each day that the finishing period corresponds with the grazing season. However, they are exempt from the minimum 30% dry matter intake from grazing. You can use yards, feeding pads, and feedlots to provide finishing feed. They have to be large enough to prevent crowding and competition. And then here's one specific thing, that the finishing period shall not exceed 1/5 of the animal's total life, or 120 days, whichever is shorter. So you can't be so.
Oh yeah. So
You have to be
you could cheat the rule there, I guess, could you?
What?
So yeah, you could cheat the rule if that wasn't there.
Yeah. So yeah, you could just say, "Oh, I'm finishing them
Finishing
for
them the whole time.
whole life." Yeah. So this is where you have to be maintaining documents and records as to when these rations are changing, and the age. Like you have to maintain records for each individual animal here, and you have to have identifiers where you can identify all the different animals. So I've seen some farms where they have a lot of pages, because they're a big operation, where there's a line for each different animal, when it was born, what happened to it, so on. So here's some avian living conditions. I'm going to touch on these very briefly. A lot of it's overlap, and then the stuff that's not overlap tends to be very nitty-gritty specific. And there's no reason for me to just spit numbers at you as to how many birds you're allowed in a certain amount of space, depending on what kind of bird it is. But similar to the living conditions we were talking about before, you have to provide year-round access to the outdoors, shade, shelter, exercise area, fresh air, sunlight, clean water, materials for dust bathing. That's obviously different. And then adequate outdoor space to escape aggressive behavior. So those are the two differences there for avian livestock.
Now, that's something that's interesting to me, because right now we keep our birds. We have a run that's attached to their coop. They can come and go from the coop to the run, but
Yeah.
we keep them in there for the first part of the day so that they lay their eggs in the nesting boxes and not out in the yard. And I guess that's acceptable, or does that count as access to outdoor?
I think that they must be. I think that they must have. Well, when we get to temporary confinement, we'll see if that. I can't remember if that comes up
Okay.
with temporary confinement, because that's what you're discussing is temporary confinement. Like that would be like temporary confining a sheep to shear it. But unless that comes up as one of the exceptions, then that would not. Unless it comes up as one of the permitted reasons for temporary confinement, that you wouldn't be permitted to do that on an organic operation. So indoor space has to be sufficiently spacious for birds to move freely, stretch both wings simultaneously, stand normally, engage in natural behavior. There's specific rules about monitoring ammonia levels, about how often you have to do it, what the ppm has to be. Again, I'm not going to spit that out right here. It's all there in 205, 241. And then you can use artificial light to prolong the day length. There's restrictions as to like how many hours that can be. It can't just go on and off. It has to like turn off gradually.
I see. Yeah,
About
right
that.
now during the winter, we use heat lamps inside the coop to keep them warm. So that might impact the way we heat the coop, I suppose.
Well, I mean, getting back to this, that, I guess they don't want to talk about temperature here, but,
Well, I mean that because they're lights, it's artificial
yes.
light that we use to heat the coop all night long. And
Use it
so,
all night long. Well, I mean, y- yeah, so I mean, if I'm pulling it up more specific here. So for layers and all other fully feathered birds, artificial light may be used to prolong the day length, to provide up to 16 hours of continuous light in a 24-hour period. So there must be a minimum of 8 hours of continuous darkness in a 24-hour period. And artificial light intensity should be lowered gradually to encourage hens to move to perches or settle for the night. And artificial light spectrum may not be manipulated to increase feed intake, and growth rate.
I
So
don't
they
even
must
know
have
about
a
that,
minimum
but
of 8 hours of darkness.
yeah. So we'd have to move to a non-heat lamp, heat source, I suppose, in the winter.
Yeah, or somehow, yeah, have that. I don't know if you could have that somehow hidden from them, but it's still heating the air. I'm not familiar with that enough,
Yeah,
but
I think about it.
yeah. Some indoor space requirements, exit areas. There's specifics about how big those have to be, like how many linear feet of exit area. Requirement for perches. Again, there's some very specific details about what that is in indoor stocking rates, and then the indoor they have to have access to areas in the house to allow for scratching and dust bathing. Litter must be provided and maintained in a dry condition in the house. So this is just
Okay, so this is stuff I can look up these specific things in the CFR.
yeah. If you had specific, I mean, I have it in front of me in case you had, if there was something specific you wanted to ask.
Oh, I'd
But
like to just have it available to read. So I'm assuming
yeah,
it's out on the
sure,
enterprise.
yeah. If you just search like NOP 205, that screenshot I had at the beginning there of the Federal Code of Federal Regulations should be there. And then you're looking down at 205, 241. Let's see, printed out on 8.5 by 11. It's about 3 pages.
Oh, that's not much. Okay.
Outdoor, kind of similar, but access to outdoor space and indoor spacing must be designed to promote and encourage outdoor access. So, birds, if they're not trained to go outside, they're not going to go outside. So you have to kind of do that. So you have to provide an early age and train them to go outside, so they are. And then similar to some of the ruminant requirements with sort of their feedlots is that, but this has to be soil 75%. Soil sections have to have appropriate vegetative cover, and that's appropriate for like the time of year, animal species, and so on.
Yeah, that's tough inside the run because they eat it all. So I'd
Yeah,
have to move the run around, I suppose.
yeah, yeah, and then there's stocking rate requirements as well.
Yeah.
Let me see if there's anything in. So yeah, the vegetative cover appropriate for the season, climate, geography, species of livestock, and stage of production. And then you have to do it in a way that doesn't, harbor rodents and other pests.
Yeah.
All right, just a couple more here, and then we'll be done for the evening. So temporary confinement of avian. So here's where is again, most of this overlaps with what we talked about earlier. Inclement weather, stage of life, health, safety, well-being, risk to soil or water. So you can
Uh-oh, I think he's locked up.
Yep. I'm still here. I hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you too.
That's okay. This is the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, darn, so close.
Yeah.
Well, I do not
Well, I
have,
tell you what, while he's frozen, let me ask you a question. For the Farmers Market Association, do you guys provide any kind of uh, pre-inspection kind of guidance? Somebody could come out and say, well, I have chickens, or I have fiber-bearing animals, and I'm looking to get organically certified. Is there somebody that could come out and walk through? But we lost him altogether, didn't we?
he might be trying to reconnect.
That's okay. He'll come back in a minute. Yeah. Do you guys offer that kind of thing, or is there maybe the USDA offers that, or somebody else?
Off the top of my head, the only thing I can think of is that we would be able to connect you with someone who already raises organic eggs
I
or
see.
chickens.
Mhm.
And I believe that Mike or Katie have talked about mentors
Yeah,
that you can
that's
talk
a great
with.
idea.
Yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to mention is NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service. They have programs that are specifically for organic production. And in fact, that's our next topic. There's Mike again. On August 13th, we're going to be talking with NRCS or
Okay, will that be a virtual as well?
yes,
Okay.
yes. Mike, he was asking if, I believe you mentioned this one time in a previous one, about mentors that you can talk to, come out and help you
Yeah.
make sure you're doing the
So
right thing.
there's the top mentorship program, where you would apply. The organization here in West Virginia the names are also familiar. So similar. I'm just doing a quick loop. No, I did some talks with them. Top West Virginia. So we're with the West Virginia Farmers Market Association here today, and it is, oh, this is so embarrassing. Just give me a sec.
Whereabouts is Jefferson County?
So it's the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition.
Okay.
And PCO, Pennsylvania Certified Organic, is like our region head. So that's the entire sort of Northeast. And then specifically in West Virginia, it's the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition. And they are the ones who are operating the mentorship program in West Virginia. And through that, you're able to apply to get a mentor where they'll work with you for like 40 hours a year to help you basically transition organic. They'll run through all this stuff and make sure you're doing it and have a plan in place and basically put together an OSP, which is essentially an application for to be certified organic with the certifier.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great.
Just to quickly, the last couple of things I was going to talk about, so was just transport. Well, I won't pull the slides up, but livestock must be clearly identified as organic and it has to be traceable during transport. They have to be fit for transport. They have to be transported in something that is adequate for the season to provide, the right temperature and heat and so on. If it's a long time, you have to have a plan in place for their welfare. And then when it comes to slaughter, basically that's where things start to leave organic purview, and it's the food and safety and the FDA regulations are kind of take over there, although they have to be an organic handler.
Right. Okay. You did mention that earlier.
Yeah. So when it comes to those last couple of sections, and then I don't know, I think I probably got caught up with manure, but manure is just, you have to manage it in a way that doesn't hurt the natural resources and contaminate anything. So that is the gist of, that's largely what there is to know about organic livestock production. And those are the regulations that you're looking to follow. And that ends my presentation. Are there any other questions at this point?
Hey, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate y'all doing this just for me. That was great. I thought there would be a lot more interest. In general, I just have some, Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's recorded, so it's gonna be put on the web and it's gonna be there for anybody who couldn't make it today, and anybody might look to it in the future. So hopefully if you're watching it now, to future viewers, I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Me too.
Yes.
Hey,
Excellent.
so how much interest is there in organic? And then, from people wanting to produce organic, whether it be vegetables or meat produce, agriculture, things like that. And then also, how much draw is there in West Virginia? I'm imagining Charleston and Morgantown and some of the other larger areas may be a bigger draw for organic kind of produce, but what does it look like from your perspective?
Sure. Well, for us, one of the reasons we wanted to be a certified organic farm, well, first of all, that's how we just want to be growing. There's actually even things that are permitted under certified organic crop production that we elect not to do just because of how we want to grow. So there's things that we could be doing, but we don't want to be putting on hazmat suits and to be spraying certain things that we could be. But then also we saw it as an opportunity for us as a new farm in the area to get our foot in the door with some markets. We didn't see a whole lot of organic operations around, and so we thought that that would give us an edge getting a farmer's market, and it certainly did. From year one, we found some good markets to be in, and we were really happy with them. And yeah, I feel like there's not a whole lot. My understanding is there's not a whole lot of organic growers in West Virginia at this point. And I think when it comes to what you're asking about in terms of demand for it, that can be very region specific. So the better you know your area and what people are looking for, that can help facilitate your decision. And then for us also, we know like a lot of people, a lot of shoppers, potential customers. I think as you saw tonight, there's a lot of details and there's a lot to know. And I think your average customer kind of has an idea of what organic means. And we kind of just wanted to like put things to bed where they're like, okay, they're organic, so I know it's okay. Whether or not they knew what that meant, we knew for some shoppers who not everybody has the time or energy to do all kinds of research, or like, especially to navigate farms that are not organic but might be doing organic things. And so we didn't want people to make assumptions about us. So we really wanted to have the ability to say, here's what we're doing, and put that out there in a very clear way. We're certified organic. We're not using GMOs. We're not using synthetic pesticides, things like that.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Now, where is Franklin County? What part of the state are you in? I mean, you said Jefferson, not Franklin.
Jefferson, Harper's Ferry, the very tip of the Eastern
Oh,
Panhandle.
you're way up there. Okay, yeah. So I imagine there's probably quite a few folks up there that would be interested in organic. Do you see that a lot of your customers?
Yeah, I mean, one of our market, we're in like sort of the greater DC bubble, so there's a large population, and a lot of them like that we're organic, and we like that we're organic.
Well, we're great. That's all the questions I had. I think I really do appreciate it, and I'd like to be involved in the I think you called it on August 13th, the NRCS course for organic production.
Yeah, it's the programs that they offer. That they can help you with pasture management, and as well as I can remember from working there 3 years ago, they have specific programs for organic use.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about that on August 13th. I'm not sure who's going to be actually doing the talking, but that is the topic. And then the final top session is going to be in September, and I can't remember the date right off the top of my head, but it is a general roundup of and conclusion. So if you have any other questions that you want to ask during that time, that's fine too. That's the time to do it. But we really appreciate you, Mike, and taking the time to spend with us this evening. And Jason, thank you very much for joining us. And this has been a great, very interesting topic, and kind of a best kept secret. So tell all your friends about the top meetings, and the recordings will be available on YouTube. I put the links in the chat box. So take advantage of those if you'd like. And we really appreciate you all taking your time, and we'll see you the next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.